Hey, so today we're going to do a special edition of our history briefings. I realize it's not Friday, but I have a special guest with me who is here on campus today, and I get a good chance to do a bit about an interesting piece of IU history that I almost guarantee you don't know anything about. Eric Langowski was here on campus today, and I'm going to give you a chance. Why were you back? Eric is a alum. Graduated last May, right?
2018.
2018.
So.
Yeah. I worked with him when he was a student here a little bit and when he worked on this research project. So that's how I know him. But he was back on campus today. Why were you back on campus? What were you doing?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was back on campus because today is February 19th. And every year on February 19th, Japanese Americans across the country acknowledge, commemorate, and remember today, in the Day of Remembrance, the signing of Executive Order 9066, which started the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans from the West Coast during World War II.
Okay. And so there was also a presentation and some stuff. We're at the Asian Culture Center on campus. There was some stuff that they had a program today, and Eric was a part of that program, and he presented on some research that he's recently done that was published by the Indiana Magazine of History. So tell us a little bit, what was your research project about?
Yeah, so one of the last things I did at IU before I graduated was undertake a research project on Indiana University's treatment of Japanese Americans during World War II, and I found, well, as a few others knew, that Indiana University banned Japanese Americans from attending, and I went through the archive and tried to understand why they did that, as well as who was affected by it. So who were the students that applied and tried to come.
And how common was this? Was this something like a lot of Big Ten schools did this? Were there, every school in Indiana, did they do this?
Yeah, so it was both common and uncommon at the same time. So it was common in the sense that only about a quarter of American universities admitted Japanese Americans during the war. But what was uncommon about IU's policy is that they kind of unilaterally decided to ban Japanese Americans much sooner and without any pressure from the military, and that was a decision that was different from other schools in the Big Ten and different from other schools in Indiana. So it was easier for smaller religious non-public schools to admit Japanese Americans. So if we look at Oberlin or Earlham College in southern Indiana, they admitted a lot of Japanese Americans. But for the schools in the Big Ten, most of them weren't able to admit Japanese Americans until 1943 or 1944. But IU decided to ban Japanese Americans from May of 1942 to September of 1945.
So how you said they weren't allowed to admit them until 43 or 44? What was going on then?
Yeah, so the initial decision to incarcerate and put Japanese Americans in internment camps or incarceration camps or concentration camps was made by the military and overseen by the military. So then basically all Japanese Americans were in military custody, and that gave the military control over where Japanese Americans could go. So part of that was that you had to get military clearance or military permission to attend a college or a university, regardless of where it was in its connection to any military sites or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. And so you said today, you talked about you had family that were caught up in this, that were in college when this happened. So it was your grandmother?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah, so my grandmother was finishing her sophomore year in early 1942 when she had to withdraw and then was sent to a camp in rural Colorado. But luckily, she was able to find a college willing to accept her, which was something that it took a lot of Japanese Americans a long time and it was hard to do. So she ended up going to school in rural Kansas. But that kind of her experience of leaving the camp to go to college was something that really piqued my interest in studying what IU decided with regards to Japanese Americans.
And so I know in your research you've narrowed it down. You've definitely found some Japanese Americans that were denied admissions. One of which even worked at the university at the time, but was denied admission as a student. Is that right?
Yeah, it's right. Although there's a little bit of nuance around. She worked at Robert Long Hospital, which was a hospital affiliated with the university at that time, and she lived in Indianapolis. And she applied to attend IU in, I think, 1943. And she was rejected because she was Japanese, and that's kind of I mean, that's
The short version of it.
The short version
Yeah.
of it, yeah.
So how did IU end this ban? I mean, when did all this come to an end?
Yeah, so it came to end and kind of in multiple steps. So in 1944, honorably discharged veterans applied to Indiana University, and IU decided that they shouldn't be banned. So then they changed their ban to be everyone except honorably discharged veterans is banned. So that was kind of the beginning of the end, but the ban itself didn't actually end until after the war in September 1945. And then, as far as we could tell from looking at the archive today, no veterans enrolled at IU in that time period until the fall 1946 semester.
And in 46 semester, we had 2 Japanese American veterans that we know of that enrolled, right?
Yes.
So one of them was Ted Tsukiyama. Am I saying that right? Okay. And so Ted actually wrote this great book. I totally recommend this read. I actually meant to bring the book in, and I left it at home. But this is a great book that he wrote about his experience. And he has another interesting history piece that he was in the University of Hawaii ROTC when Pearl Harbor was attacked. And that ROTC unit is the only ROTC unit ever called to active duty and mobilized. And they spent weeks guarding installations around Hawaii and Pearl Harbor in the early part of the war before they were all kicked out of the Hawaii Territorial Guard, the National Guard for Hawaii, for being Japanese Americans. And then he went on to serve with the Varsity Victory Volunteers, I may have reversed those. The 3V group, which was a paramilitary group in Hawaii that worked for the Army. And then he eventually joined the Army when they started allowing Japanese Americans in, and he kind of tells that story through this. I will also put a link in the notes to Eric's paper. The Indiana Magazine of History has actually taken down the paywall on this article so that people will be able to access it and read it and get to it. And I recommend you read it if you're fascinated with IU history. This will be fascinating. If you're fascinated with history of Japanese Americans or Japanese American wartime World War II history, this will be interesting for you to read. I think you'll get a lot out of it. And so thanks for meeting with me today, Eric, and thanks for being on the video.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.